Thank you, Vice Chancellor J.W. Harrington, and thank you all for attending the inaugural annual Debra Friedman Lecture. My name is Ali Mudaris. I am the Director of Urban Studies Program. On behalf of Urban Studies, I would like to welcome you to what promises to be an engaging conversation tonight. I have to tell you a little secret before I start doing the introductions. So last year, about this time, I was on campus interviewing, and Debra and I had breakfast about 7 o'clock in the morning, which is really tough for me, 7 o'clock in the morning breakfasts. And we had talked only a little bit before we realized that we had a common friend by the name of David Perry. And before she asked me for anything else to do, and as a part of the condition that I would probably get a job here, was that to bring David Perry here. So I did deliver that promise. Now, in terms of David Perry, I am sure he will be singing our praises. But more importantly, he will put a shining light on a concept we have heard multiple times, urban serving universities, and what it means to be a place-based anchor institution. I'm sure he will tell you that the reciprocal nature of relationship between University of Washington, Tacoma and our larger urban region is less common than many of us assume. It is not something that every university has. This is something special to be cherished, sustained and grown over the years. Tacoma's identity and place in the world is a part of who we are, and who we are is a part of the identity of the region. Chancellor Friedman gave a new life and a new energy to building this relationship. She understood the role that an institution of higher education like the UW could play in a place like Tacoma and the South Sound. As David Perry will tell you momentarily, Debra understood what it means to be an urban-serving, place-based anchor institution. She also understood the transformative role of higher education and what it can do for the life of students and communities. As an urban-serving institution, it's something we have to understand that this is not a label to wear. It is a deed, an action, a commitment for today, tomorrow, next month, and the years to come. It is a relationship that needs to be cherished and nurtured. It is about our mutual love of a place. It is also quite complex. With that in mind, I cannot think of anyone more qualified, more capable, more eloquent than Professor David Perry to speak about this important role universities can play. In the proverbial way, he has written the book on it, and being David, he has written multiple books on it. But how does one introduce David Perry? Now I come to the difficult task. It is truly a humbling experience to look at his achievements and contributions inside and outside of academia. For the past 2 weeks, I have agonized about how to introduce him. A great friend. What am I going to say? I thought I'd start telling you about all the books he has written, book chapters he has written, hundreds of articles he has written, recent books that he has written on this topic, including Here for Good, Community Foundation and the Challenges of the 21st Century, Global Universities and Urban Development, the University as Urban Developer. He has written. He has continued to write about this topic. He loves the topic, so he writes about it. I also was going to tell you a little bit about his other stuff that he has written, New York Times, The Nation. He writes significantly on this topic, and it's not just the only topic. He writes about the American cities and the social condition of American cities and the planning challenges that the American cities face. After I wrote all of that down, I decided I should not probably read all that because I think it was intimidating me, and I began to feel like I have not done anything with my life. So I convinced myself that as a friend, he would not want me to be intimidated in any shape or form. So I started looking at the chronology of his illustrious careers, trying to remind myself of all the stuff he has done and the places he's been, from Syracuse to Texas to Buffalo, to being at Cleveland State, to Rockefeller Institute, to all the appointments he has had in various universities and the lectures he has given around the globe, and things were not getting any better. Then I started sort of thinking about, Okay, so let's just focus on his UIC years. So I'm just going to look at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and here I began to sort of see all the accomplishment again. One cannot think of UIC without thinking about the Great Cities Institute. David Perry, 12 years directing it, right? And also he served as the Associate Chancellor for UIC's Great Cities Commitment. He's a professor of urban planning and policy in the College of Urban Planning and Public Affairs at the UIC. And I can tell you that he won't quit being productive and influential until he makes all of us look bad. That's his mission in life. As you can see, I started to become bitter at this point, writing about all that stuff. So about page 5 or 6, I stopped. So I decided to introduce him this way. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and privilege to introduce you to someone who is an inspiration to all of us, and someone who has put the love of cities and communities in his lifelong practice and intellectual endeavors. Please help me give a warm welcome to our friend and colleague and a champion of urban serving universities, Professor David Perry.
I don't know who he was talking about. It must have been Ali. I want to, first of all, before I begin, I want to make sure that I thank Ali Modares, Julia Smith, and everyone, and Brian and Jan and everybody in the Urban Studies program for making me absolutely welcome today. I also want to take a minute to say thank you to Tacoma. My friend, my research partner for many, many years was Debra Friedman. And when she spoke about cities, she did not in the end speak about Phoenix, Melissa. She did not speak about Seattle. She spoke about you. She spoke about you. She was not a daughter of Washington, the state. She was a daughter of Tacoma. I spent a lifetime, as Ali has said, I have spent a lifetime in cities. When I've been in the street, I wanted to be in the classroom, Fern. When I've been in the classroom, I wanted to be in the street, Brian. I just always wanted to be in that mix. I learned early on that there was an organization called Urban Serving Universities. And over that time, and living in the many cities that Ali has talked about, I came to know 3 great, great presidents of higher education. The first is in Los Angeles. He hired me actually in Buffalo, New York, and his name was Stephen Sample. And Steve, as JW knows, Steve was my first mentor, as he was JW's, and a bunch of us. And I went on, later on, to be hired by another great higher education leader, Wim Wiewel, who is now just down the road from you at another institution called Portland State University, where he's president. The third person who came to be, I think, a great leader in higher education was Debra Friedman. Now she's gone. Tacoma and Seattle. Tacoma, you lost a daughter. You lost a great leader, not only of this university, but of this city. I lost a great research partner. I lost one of my dearest friends. And so to say today, as I said to Julia a few moments ago, Julia Smith, this is in some ways the most important lecture I've ever given. It is a lecture that I never wanted to give. I wanted her in that room with me giving it, but I have to do it alone. But I want to thank all of you for coming to support me tonight. This is not going to be the traditional academic lecture. This is going to be about how cities and their universities learn to be foundational to urban change. It's going to be up to you to lead this university as much as it's going to be up to the university to live up to the expectations, to the challenges, to the absolute demands you should make upon it. Because the university is Tacoma, and Tacoma is, as Ali said, this university. Now, the subject, as Ali pointed out a few moments ago, is rather straightforward. Place-based institutions in general, and universities in particular, are not going anywhere. The University of Tacoma is part of your DNA now. The question, though, is open, and that's a question only you can answer. I can't. But the question is whether these institutions, this university and universities like it, are simply going to be mired in their urban context, not moving, or whether or not they're going to do things that are absolutely foundational and change Tacoma for the better. That's what you have to demand of this university, and this university should do it because it is, as I said before, and as Ali pointed out, Tacoma. Now, I want to start, and I usually don't, but I'm from Chicago, and I opened up the Chicago Tribune, our daily newspaper, a little while back, and I read the business section, like most of us do, and I still read it hard copy. I don't read it. I read it every morning. I go down at 5:30 in the morning and get the paper. It's probably age that makes me do it on all fronts, but I still want to read the paper in the morning. And there was a full-page article about the downtown economy, about a part of the downtown economy that most of you will probably know without having seen Chicagoland as the Loop. I live on the edge of the Loop. The article, however, was not about the Boeing office in the Loop, nor was it about the Chicago Mercantile Exchange in the Loop. It was simply titled, the title of that article was Loop U. And it described an educational corridor that I'll come back to in a few moments that has emerged in the city and been foundational to urban change in the Loop. Now, the conversation I want to engage in you now is going to take about 38 to 40 minutes. So you can get a nap in if you want. But I'm going to try and keep you alive and awake long enough. I'll present today a conversation that suggests that this pattern of institutional importance for universities in the Loop and higher education is not simply a pattern that is endemic to Chicago. It's endemic to cities like Coventry, where Mike and Harris are from like Phoenix, where Melissa is from, and from a host of other people who are here from other parts of the world. The faculty and the students especially at universities like the University of Washington at Tacoma and my home university at UIC are far more engaged than you think. But they will only be expert and engaged if you are too. And that's what I need to do. Now, as I said, universities can, if they're really good, be anchor institutions. They can be fully vested in cities like Tacoma. They can be place-based organizations. I, for the longest time, rejected this notion of place. I went through this whole, let's get rid of place, let's get rid of history, let's be Ed Soja and stay with time, and stay with space. But the urban change that occurs when a university changes, when a state forms itself differently, when human development happens in a new way, is really pretty exciting stuff. And I will spend some time talking about Tacoma. It's not, Ali pointed out something else. He said that, look, universities can dance a good game, but the question is, are they actually doing more than just coming to the dance? Are they actually spending the whole time? Or as a friend of mine used to say in Austin, Texas, are you going to dance with the person you came with, the city you live in, or are you basically going to try and change partners prematurely? But universities have sing the song of engagement. They are the driving force in local development. They attempt to be engaged institutions, and you'll hear every university leader now saying that one of the things that they're going to do is try to be an engaged institution. They will try and have an urban agenda. They have become a $700 billion a year operation in our cities, just in our cities. And almost 2/3 of these institutions, $700 billion worth, are found in these cities. Put another way, urban universities are spending over 40% of everything they spend, 40% of $1 trillion every year in the cities of America. That's 10 times what the federal government spends in workforce development. It's 10 times what the federal government spends on housing. It is indeed what universities are about these days. And if you take a look at just the top 100 city regions in the United States, this is one of my favorite charts. It comes from the Brookings Institution, and it's something you might want to look up. The Brookings Institution says that is really quite special in terms of some of the activities it engages in. And if you just take a look at the top 100 of these regions in the United States, the SeaTac area alone, for example, you'll find that 12% of the land, we find almost 9 out of 10 people living. 9 out of 10 jobs are created here. 95% of all the venture capital is in these 100 areas. And we can go on and on and on. So it's no wonder that our students want to go to school in such institutions. The urban degree granting institutions of the United States are 68% of all all degree granting institutions. And they produce 67% of all the students. 63 to 65%, Debra Friedman and I discovered, of all BAs. 3/4 of all masters. 3/4 of all PhDs. 8 out of 10 doctors and dentists come from these institutions. They employ about 1.5 million of us on a full-time basis. And there's 8 million students produced attending them every year. Annual revenues and expenditures. When you think about what they're expending in the urban centers right now, they're spending over $640 billion a year in revenues and expenditures. And of the 50 most populated metropolitan areas in the United States, every one of them, 100% of them, have a public urban research university, and almost all of them have a private urban research university. Now, I've spent a lot of time, as Ali said, studying these institutions, going around the country, looking at them, and mostly for a group called the Urban Serving Universities. Bevel and myself, Friedman and Menendez, 4 of us in particular, have spent a lot of time taking a look at what goes into a university that is foundational to the city, that is not simply mired in the city, but is an anchor in the development and the change of a city. And let me just cut to the chase. There's 3 basic categories that are really important and I really want to focus on with you tonight. The first is the campus isn't a campus anymore. It's not, I mean, I don't know how many of you in this room went to a campus where there was a science quad and a liberal arts and science quad or humanities quad and the like. I mean, campus is a Greek word. It means field. It doesn't even mean city. But the campus isn't a campus anymore. Think of the University of Washington at Tacoma. Think of the campus of the University of Washington at Tacoma. It's much more than a quad. It is Tacoma. It's an urban space. And what we discovered is that if you are really going to walk the walk and not just attend the dance of being an engaged institution, you're going to basically produce a campus that's a city space, an urban space. Secondly, if you start to build a campus, and especially at universities today that have buildings that are going up, they are not just dormitories anymore. They're not just science buildings anymore. Think of the building here, and the buildings on either side of us. Each one of them is mixed use. Part of it is private sector. Part of it is public sector and university-based. Part of it is taxed. Part of it is not. Universities that are really, truly engaged are going to basically take more than a silent or a pilot responsibility seriously. They're going to really start to think about how they can put tax dollars to work in their city. Because just like you and me in Tacoma, the University of Washington at Tacoma, and this will not be a popular statement, but I will say it, and I've said it before and I'll say it again. They've got to learn to be a taxing entity. So university development is increasingly mixed use. where the buildings are no longer simply university buildings, they're urban buildings. And thirdly, old thinking was that when you went in planning school, you went into landscape architecture school, you could take a course in campus planning, which meant you planned quads. You planned fields, and you put fields of buildings around the fields of the quads. Today, it's got to be a lot more than that. A campus plan, and the campus plans I'm going to talk about tonight, were not built by academics. They were built by planners working at City Hall, and urban development consultants, and architects, and designers. All sorts of people who could help build a city, one of the citizens of which is a university. There are three types of approaches to this. Universities can be anchors or collaborators. And I'm going to bring us back to Chicago Loop, the Loop in Chicago, and Loop U, just to give you a little bit of an example of it. The second thing is that basically universities that are going to be truly engaged in their cities, they're going to anchor and be foundational to change, are going to basically have to do all sorts of things. They're going to have to be 360 degrees of development. They have to be neighbors. They have to be planners. They have to be entrepreneurs. They have to be all these things. They can't simply decide that the University of Washington Tacoma is going to plan, but it's not going to be a mixed-use development, or it's going to be a mixed-use development and be entrepreneurial, but it's not going to be a good neighbor. The question is, how does a university produce 360 degrees of urbanness? And then lastly, universities need to be community-based organizations. Examples of public safety and education immediately come to mind, but it can be a lot more things than that. The question is, how safe is your neighborhood, and how clearly are universities engaging in helping you to have a safe neighborhood? Now, let me just give you the case of Chicago again. I wasn't going to use it, but the Chicago Tribune forces me to use it. Why? Because the city of Chicago said, academic, get real. The city planner, when I interviewed her, said, look, there's one area of the city that is a desolate hole in the metropolitan donut. We have tried everything. We've had economic development planners and consultants and cluster economists and all sorts of economists come in and try desperately to stem the tide of the private sector and the market leaving. But basically, the market has continued to leave. Leaving, and I might as well just go right to it right now. You know this area right in here? How many here have been to the Loop in your life? Oh, good. That helps me out. And how many here have been to Grant Park? Millennium Park is over there on the end. But this section right in here, the Wabash State area, the private sector was bailing out of that like there was no tomorrow. And there was nothing we could do except close the doors and take the tax loss. The goal was that there was no way that you could get anyone in here, in this area. So, what really happens is that I think the best example of this was the Goldblatt Building. Now, does everyone know the Goldblatt Building? Does anyone know it? Does anyone know? Lisa, you remember Goldblatt. It was a department store, wasn't it? And it was empty for 10 years. Why? We were going to shut down the old Civic Center and the old library, and we were going to turn that building in Chicago into the library. The problem was this building was sturdy enough to hold dresses, but not sturdy enough to hold books. The engineers, when they came in, said, this building's going to collapse, and it's a historical building. So so the city took it back on the tax rolls, and it stayed there. It took it off the tax rolls, rather, and it stayed there. And the only people who occupied it were not dressmakers and were not librarians, but were pigeons. Lots of pigeons were in 12 stories of the Goldblatt Building. The city owned it, but it took it off the tax rolls. The city wanted to revitalize that district, as I said. It was a desolate hole in the metropolitan donut. Goldblatt had left. The law firms were leaving. There were a couple of universities hanging around, and one was DePaul University. And DePaul said, Ken McHugh, who was the vice president of DePaul, he said, I'll take over this whole building. And the top 4 stories we'll turn into the presidential offices. These 4 floors, City Hall was thinking of building a new housing building, but it didn't have the money. And so frankly, the mayor happened to be an alum of, well, it is Chicago after all, and he was an alum of DePaul. And so he said, why don't we create a leaseback deal here where we'll lease for 25 years, the city will lease this and pay off the loan for DePaul to renovate this building. $5 million plus $60 million, $65 million bucks. And these floors here will turn into private sector buildings because these floors are tax-free. But these floors with Barnes & Noble and bookstores and music stores and restaurants and the like, they could become tax-generating entities. The combination was incredible. 40% university, 40% city leaseback space, 20% retail, better known as mixed use. The second thing you remember about Loop U is that basically what the city planner said was, we want to basically build a 24/7 space downtown. And we can't get any law firms, any to do anything. So what they did was that there was a parking lot 3 blocks away from the center. And the only people that used the parking lot were people who negotiated over crack cocaine. It was better known as a drug parking lot. And DePaul said to the city planner, the same one who said, look, I'm sitting on a desolate hole in the donut here. What am I going to do with this urban environment? Loop U's doing fine in some spots, but not in others. DePaul said, we'll take over the whole thing because we want to create, we have a strategic plan that really wants to put lots of dorm rooms in. And the city planner went to the mayor and said, and the mayor and the city planner said, no. We want a mixed use and we want a collaboration between higher education institutions. So we got 4 more institutions. The result is something called the University Center. It was built in 5 years. It took over the whole block. You know Chicago city blocks. Yeah, I don't know if you've had to walk them, but they can be long. You know, and since I live on the edge of the loop and I do a lot of walking, I get a lot of counting when I'm walking from one block to another. I don't know about you, but I do. And so, very quickly, the building has a capacity now of 1,700 residents in apartments and in rooms and in mixed residential standards. It shares 18 floors. 18 floors. They're right there. But these 2 floors are all, again, retail. So basically, we had a coalition of universities and a tax-generating retail center, the combination of which is the largest residential structure in the United States for DePaul, for Roosevelt University, for John Marshall University, and for Columbia College. What's really important here is that the planning was a city plan. And I began to see that it's you, the city that's telling the university how to engage. There is indeed there are goals here, and the goals are expert goals. Now, what's the outcome of this? I mean, what you've got is now an academic corridor has been created. There are 47 for-profit, private, public, 2-year, 4-year graduate programs, professional programs in the academic corridor. The largest landowner in the loop is now a university, Columbia College. And there are now 70,000 students downtown, making Loop U now the largest collaborated university space in the state of Illinois. It's going to 95 to 100,000 students in the next 5 years. We're going to have 25,000 employees in that area in the next 5 years. We're going to have 1.7 million visitors coming to dance recitals and basketball games and the like in the next 5 years. We're going to have $200 million in land value. It's going to move up to $1.5 billion in land value in the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a projected 18 million square feet for university development in the next 5 years. Therefore, the academic corridor is no longer the desolate hole in the downtown donut. It's a new anchor of Chicago's development of the loop. It's a 24/7 educational corridor with clusters in the knowledge economy. And quite frankly, there is absolutely no displacement or gentrification going on in the loop. And that, for me, was very important. Let me just move on to 2 other sort of things. And what I really want to do is I want to move you from Chicago to Atlanta. And again, I don't want you, speaking of Tacoma, to consider what I'm doing. I want you to relate. I don't want you to try and compare scale or size or things like that of Coventry or Tacoma or whatever. I want it to be basically a way of relating different models of change. We have 3. Another thing that a university has to do, just like you do with your neighbor or your planner or whatever else, is you've got to be there for the person when the person has needs. I mean, it's not you as a university have to figure out how administratively and programmatically and in expertise and with students to meet a whole constellation of urban needs. Let me just, for example, there's the case of Morehouse College, which is a small private, speaking of scale, neighborhood university. And it's a university where the goal was to revitalize the surrounding residential area of the college. Why? Because they had limited funds, no endowment to speak of. Hello, how big is the endowment at the University of Washington at Tacoma? I mean, I'm just not going to ask for an answer to that yet. But even less, even more important than the lack of endowment was the lack of community trust. The community of parents didn't want to send their kids to Morehouse anymore. Why? It was too dangerous at the edge. And the community that lived next door to the campus didn't see the campus as something that could support it in terms of security or anything like that. So what Morehouse did, and this is something, is that instead of trying to go it alone, it was another form of coalition building. Morehouse went and developed its own a CDC in which it was simply a partner. A community development corporation was set up where they started to build housing that could be rented by state, in which they basically controlled the stability of the market. And working in partnership with about 5 to 6 other people, Morehouse has been able to turn it around. It has a CDC-led affordable housing effort in which the university is a partner. The university, and I'm going to sees its self-interest, and you have to understand that universities are self-interested entities just like you are. Universities work on, and I will use the Platonic sort of notion of self-interest, on an enlightened self-interest approach. Academics can say things like that. You know, if I was not an academic, I wouldn't say it. And so Morehouse in the city, after setting up a CDC, actually the Morehouse was able to get the city to swap out certain land for the very first time. And that land has led to development of part of the university campus. The same thing is true for Ohio State University. Let's go just the other side. Let's get the biggest university, one of the biggest public universities in the United States. It even makes Washington, Seattle look a little tiny. But what Ohio State was able to do is, in Ohio State, the legislature won't let the university own land and fixed assets. So the university went to its foundation and it said, set up a different type of entity, an intermediary entity that allows us to work with land, improve rental housing, own the rental housing, and basically the university now has upgraded, is the largest upgrader of Section 8 housing in the United States. And so it went just the other way. And then there's your city, Tacoma, and the work of Brian Coffey and Jan Deidecker. They have really, Jan and Brian, I used their work and I pulled it out and I used it because I think the work that you have in urban studies here is really compelling stuff. And Jan and Brian should be really proud of the chapter that they contributed to a book by them and me. But the land was, how did the university get to be where it is in Tacoma? Was it an academic plan put together by the University of Washington in Seattle? Or was it, quite frankly, a city plan for adaptive reuse put together by you, the city of Tacoma, of the warehouses and the anchor downtown, that anchor in downtown development, those warehouses were dead. Just like the Chicago case, they had left. And basically you brought, with the help of the legislature and with the help of the regents and with the help of the city of Tacoma, it was the academics were brought to Tacoma. Academics did not come. Ali is here because of Debra Friedman, who is here because of you. And you basically are the ones that really matter here. This is not an academic talk. And lastly, universities in this 360-degree adventure, universities also have to be capitalists. They have to be entrepreneurs. And I want to basically, and it's interesting. I'm gonna bring this to a close in about 7 to 10 minutes. So, but there was a deserted zone called in Atlanta where, again, the private sector was leaving. In the Midtown area, between 1980 and the year 2000, 60% of the building structures in Midtown Atlanta. Now, you do have the High there, and there's a couple of odds and ends. There's a neat shopping mall, and there's all sorts of different things like that. But 60% of the land and the buildings were vacant, in bankruptcy, or in foreclosure. No private corporations would bite. Therefore, the Midtown development area created a plan, not an academic plan, to get Georgia Tech to jump the highway for the very first time. And the way it was done was that the federal government came in and put in one anchor institution, the new Federal Reserve Building. And there was a utility before Bell South became bought out. Bell South came in and put together a new structure. It was a utility, an infrastructure piece. And then there's the university, which jumps the highway. And that university was Georgia Tech. And what Georgia Tech built was, first of all, Technology Square. Now, Technology Square, let me just step back a moment. Those of us and again, I want you to figure out how you're going to attract the next group of good researchers to the University of Washington at Tacoma. And one of the ways one of the things academics will tell you is, well, we're going to build a lab for them. Well, they did. They built a new wet lab, 280,000 square feet. But that's not enough, Tacoma. That's nowhere near enough. If you really want to attract the expert to come here, then you're going to have to basically attract the expert not simply as a scientist, but also as an entrepreneur. And that means you're going to basically have to do the following. And that plan and the following was built by a university which decided to not only build the wet lab on one side of the building, of the highway, on the campus, but also to put in conjunction with that wet lab a telecommunications research lab, a new college for the business school, a new hotel and conference center, a new global learning center, a new building for the University Economic Development Institute, a new telecommunications research lab. I already mentioned that one once before. And new venture labs and new industrial sites. In short, in order to get someone from MIT or from Caltech to come to Georgia Tech during that period, between 2000 and 2006, what Georgia Tech had to do was to build a space where the professor could do a whole lot. Develop a product in the lab, but basically had all the other facilities available to him to basically turn it into a cluster for developing the product from a patent all the way over. And guess what? The private sector didn't want to get into the game too, so in essence, what Georgia Tech built, in essence, was not simply Georgia Tech Square, but Georgia Tech Centergy. And what Georgia Tech did was that it took a piece of Midtown land that it owned, and it deeded it over to the private sector. And a developer built Centergy. And what Centergy is built with, and I learned this term while working with is that the foundation put its headquarters there. And the rest of it was Pirelli tires came in, and Apple came in, and Microsoft came in, and they took over office space and brought in lawyers, and those lawyers went fishing. And they were called fishing offices. And they were fishing for scientists and their students who had built a product that they could basically purchase. So in essence, two things had happened. The university had become foundational to changing the character of Midtown. And the Midtown cluster became known by 2009 as the new growth pole of the South. Why? This was an area that in the year between 1980 and 2000 had 60% of its buildings abandoned, foreclosed, or in bankruptcy. And Georgia Tech was now competing with Caltech and MIT for top scientists. Not because because the lab wasn't enough. The lab was necessary but not sufficient, as we academics say. What was necessary and sufficient was to have the lab plus some facilities for development of products and deliverables. So it was entrepreneurial. The thing that's interesting about it is that in 30 years, that land reverts back to the university. Both the Centergy building reverts back. And that becomes a new building. Or the university can, because the university by that time will have a new product. Now, I'm going to flip through and come to a conclusion. I was actually I'm going to simply say that this is a global process. And a substantial share, as Ali pointed out, of my work over the last few years has been in Europe and in Africa and in India and in China, and it's been around the world, and I go off to the Middle East on topics like this in about 6 days. So let me just close with the United States tonight. We could have done more, but Debra Friedman and David Perry and Perry Menendez have done a fair amount over the last few years. And we have a couple of more books on the way on it. As my sons say, Dad, if you never write another book, it will be too soon. But I can't help myself. The stories of Tacoma are too important. I'm going to start with something that you know very well, and you better take care to keep it alive, and that's leadership. The one thing that may set the U.S. case off from other cases is leadership. Now, I know you had Robin Hamilton in, and Robin talked about leadership mattering, but let me tell you how it really matters in the United States. It may indeed matter more here because we are divesting more quickly of the public university. The American Public Research University, as Clark Kerr talked about it in his wondrous book that you should all look at called The Uses of a University. That project, the American Research Project, is under siege, terrible siege, both from privatization forces on the one hand, and neoliberalism, and from forces of state disinvestment in higher education and devaluation of it on the other. And you in Washington experience it incredibly. I just opened up the paper today to learn that the state of Washington has the second highest tuition rate for a public research university complex in the United States. What's Tacoma to do about that? You've got to do, there is a great transformation afoot. But increasingly, you cannot. As the planners in Chicago tell us, as the planners in the city's adaptive reuse plan in Tacoma tell us, as the planners in Atlanta tell us, they cannot do it alone. Thirdly, what this really means then is that there has been a rise in mixed-use, public-private partnerships. There's new collaborative strategies. There's new university centers born in different parts of the United States. And lastly, there are certain intermediaries, like at Ohio State, that are being built in places where the state won't get into it, so basically you're going to have to create intermediaries to help you out. It's all done around a program of situational ethics. That's an academic word for simply saying it's the universities need help. And in return, cities need help from their universities. Because it really is a situational ethics of enlightened self-interest on everybody's part. Now, I know some of you may have been coming here tonight for an academic talk. I came here tonight to celebrate the leadership of your daughter. And I can't think of a more fitting tribute to her than to make sure that the notion of an urban serving university continues to manifest itself. Because in the end, Ali said, I would be talking tonight about urban serving universities. What I'm really talking about is Tacoma, and I'm talking about you. Thank you very much for letting me come here tonight and celebrate Debra Friedman.